A growing number of couples are ditching the courtroom in favor of mediation, drawn by the promise of a faster, quieter, and far less expensive divorce. It sounds perfect. Sit down at a friendly table, hash out decisions together, shake hands, and walk away with your lives intact. But here's the catch. Without a lawyer scrutinizing every line, you may be trading legal bills for a lifelong financial hole. Imagine signing off on an agreement that seems fair in the moment, only to discover years later that you unknowingly forfeited half of your retirement savings or walked away with an alimony package that barely covers rent. Mediation's appeal lies in its simplicity, yet that very simplicity can disguise hidden pitfalls, especially for women, who often enter negotiations with less financial clout and more at stake over assets like pensions, support, and property. In this video, we're diving into the 7 most critical ways that mediation without legal review can leave you at a disadvantage. We'll uncover the blind spots in asset disclosures, reveal how negotiation styles can work against you, and explain why skipping that lawyer's stamp of approval might cost you far more than you ever imagined. Stay with me, because knowing these risks up front could save you from regrets you can't undo. Mediation sounds straightforward. You lay everything on the table, negotiate until you agree, and move on. But here's the shocker. What actually makes it to that table often represents only a fraction of your combined wealth. Without a lawyer trained to dig into complex financial structures, hidden assets can slip through the cracks. Imagine signing off on a settlement, thinking you've split everything 50-50, only to learn later that a secret investment account or an undervalued piece of real estate wasn't even mentioned. This isn't just hypothetical. Studies show that voluntary disclosure alone misses as much as 20% of assets in mediated divorces. When you're not pressing for forensic accounting reports, you're trusting your ex to be perfectly honest. And let's be real, emotions run high, memories fade, and buried financial details stay buried. That trust gap can cost tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands, especially when stock options, business interests, or offshore accounts are in play. The good news? You can guard against this blind spot. Before you sit down with a mediator, insist on a full financial audit. Request detailed bank statements going back years. Have a professional assign accurate values to every pension plan, shareholding, and property. Even that weekend getaway cabin your spouse forgot to mention. Yes, it adds time and cost up front, but it ensures you're not signing away assets you didn't know existed. But that isn't the whole story. Next, we'll see how the way you negotiate can silently tip the scales against you. You walk into that mediation room expecting a fair shake, but the rules of engagement aren't the same for everyone. Research shows women tend to aim for harmony, seeking compromise and mutual benefit. Men, on the other hand, often adopt a more assertive stance, pushing hard for their slice of the pie. In a courtroom, a judge can level the field. In mediation, there's no referee to call fouls on aggressive tactics, and that can mean women concede more simply because they're wired to preserve the peace. Picture 2 people hashing out a property split. Lisa approaches it as a conversation. She listens, asks questions, even offers concessions when she thinks it'll keep things moving smoothly. Mark sees it as a contest. He plants his flag on what he wants, haggles over every detail, and doesn't flinch until he's squeezed the other side. By the time it's over, Lisa has given up several valuable assets, convinced she's just being reasonable, while Mark walks away convinced he got a fair deal. The imbalance isn't malicious, it's baked into how we're taught to negotiate, but in a legal agreement it becomes deeply unfair. You don't have to accept that dynamic. Recognizing your default style is the first step. If gentle persistence is your strength, learn to pair it with firm boundaries. Practice framing requests in terms of facts and priorities rather than feelings. Role-play tough conversations with a lawyer or coach so you can stand your ground when stakes are high. Because once those terms are inked, it's signed, and that friendliness won't buy you a second chance. But there's more that often slips under the radar. Next, we'll expose how retirement plans and pension rights can quietly vanish when emotions steer the table. Retirement plans often fly under the radar in mediation, yet they can represent the single largest asset you and your spouse have built together. You might think splitting a 401k or a pension is straightforward. Just cut it down the middle, right? In reality, these accounts come with complex rules, tax traps, and valuation puzzles that most mediators aren't equipped to navigate. Without a lawyer to flag hidden fees or to calculate projected growth, you could unknowingly trade away tens of thousands in future income. Imagine discovering, years after your divorce is final, that your ex's pension will pay out twice as much as yours simply because they negotiated for survivor benefits you didn't even know existed. or learning that the tax penalty for early withdrawal effectively erased the difference you thought you'd gained. Mediators typically focus on what's in front of them today: account balances, property values, but retirement assets are promises of tomorrow. Ignoring their full scope is like ignoring the foundation of your financial house. You deserve a clear, expert breakdown of every retirement vehicle on the table. The defined benefit versus defined contribution plans, the spousal rights under state law, and the hidden costs of rolling accounts into IRAs. Demand a qualified actuary or pension specialist to explain the long-term implications before you agree. It may feel like extra red tape, but it's nothing compared to the lifetime of shortfall you'll face if you sign off blind. But that's not the whole picture. Next, we'll uncover how spousal support agreements in mediation can leave you struggling to pay the bills when you need help the most. Spousal support in mediation often looks like a quick fix, a neat monthly check that feels reassuring at first. But here's the catch: those numbers are usually based on today's budget, not tomorrow's reality. Without a lawyer to advocate for you, you risk agreeing to an alimony package that doesn't account for inflation, rising healthcare costs, or the possibility that you'll need additional training to re-enter the workforce. Suddenly, what seemed like a lifeline turns into a tightrope, and you're left scrambling to cover essentials on a payment schedule that may end long before you're financially secure. Take the case of Maria, who thought she'd secured fair support when her ex agreed to $1,200 a month for 5 years. She celebrated the day the agreement was signed, until she realized 2 years in that rent had climbed. Her prescription costs had doubled, and the job market required new skills she couldn't afford to train for. Mediation rarely demands a detailed projection of future expenses, and most mediators won't question whether the support timeline matches real-life needs. The result is a short-lived payout that feels generous at first glance but falls woefully short when life inevitably shifts. You can prevent this trap. Before you sign anything, insist on a full financial forecast. Account for the cost of living, healthcare premiums, potential career training, and if you have children, the expense of schooling and childcare well past the mediation table. Ask for inflation adjustment clauses and the option to revisit terms if circumstances change dramatically. It may feel like pushing back on an amicable agreement, but it's the only way to avoid being locked into payments that won't keep pace with your future needs. But that isn't the whole story. Next, we'll expose how mediation can completely overlook the financial impact of domestic and economic abuse. In mediation, it's easy to focus on bank accounts and property lines, and forget the invisible costs of abuse. When you step into that room, there's rarely space to unpack years of control, intimidation, or financial manipulation. Mediators aren't trained to dig into abusive dynamics, and without a lawyer demanding that history be acknowledged, economic injuries go uncounted. You might leave thinking you've secured your fair share, unaware that you've also signed away compensation for the very harm you endured. Imagine a woman who endured a partner's strict budget rules, every purchase monitored, every expense justified. Those small, daily tactics add up to real losses. Missed investments, drained savings, damaged credit. In court, a judge would weigh that pattern of economic abuse when awarding support or property, factoring in the cost of rebuilding credit and replacing assets sabotaged over time. In mediation, it rarely comes up. The result is a settlement that splits visible assets but ignores the silent tally of what was stripped away. This isn't theoretical. Survivors walk away from mediation with no recourse for business opportunities they were barred from or for the extra living costs they shouldered alone. They accept equal property division, only to discover later that the true value they lost was never on the table. And once you sign, you can't go back to claim what you never negotiated. To protect yourself, document every instance of financial control: bank freezes, withheld credit cards, forced debt. Insist that the mediator include a clause acknowledging economic abuse and allocate funds for recovery, whether that's credit repair, legal fees, or career retraining. Bring an advocate or attorney who understands these patterns and can insist the discussion happen. It may feel uncomfortable to raise painful memories, but leaving them out means you'll pay for that silence in lost dollars and a diminished sense of justice. But that isn't the whole picture. Next, we'll explore why mediation's finality can lock you into unfair terms with no second chance. Once you've signed a mediation agreement, think of it as a one-way street. There's rarely a U-turn. Unlike court orders, which can be modified if circumstances change, mediated deals are binding contracts with few escape hatches. If you later discover you agreed to a bad deal, maybe you missed a hidden expense, or your income drops, or the cost of living spikes, you're stuck. Courts won't hear you out simply because you wish you'd negotiated better. They enforce what you signed. That lack of a second look can cost you dearly. Picture this. You settle on dividing household expenses in a way that seems balanced today. But 3 years later your ex's business booms while your part-time work stalls. You ask to revisit the terms, but the agreement is airtight. Your recourse is limited to proving fraud or duress, an uphill battle that's expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally draining. For most women, the cost of reopening a case outweighs any potential gain, so they live with the unfair terms. Even enforcement is an uphill climb. In court-based agreements, if a spouse falls behind on alimony or child support, you can seek contempt charges, wage garnishments, or liens. In mediation, you must turn right back to the civil court system just to enforce what you thought you'd settled, adding legal fees and months of delay. By then, the financial harm has compounded. To avoid being boxed in, build and review triggers and enforcement mechanisms before you sign. Demand clauses that allow for renegotiation under specific conditions: job loss, medical costs, or other major life changes. Specify what happens if terms aren't met, outlining clear penalties or automatic adjustments. It might feel like you're complicating an easy process, but it's far easier than trying to claw back your rights when it's too late. And that isn't even the end of the story. Next, we'll uncover the hidden emotional forces that lure you into a supposedly amicable agreement, masking the true cost. You step into mediation expecting civility and compromise, and that atmosphere can feel comforting, until it quietly pressures you into concessions you'd never make in court. The idea of an amicable split is seductive. No rancor, no public airing of dirty laundry, just a calm conversation. But that very calm can mask power imbalances, subtle guilt trips, and emotional appeals that steer you away from insisting on your fair share. Imagine the mediator urging you both to keep things friendly for the kid's sake, while your spouse casually mentions wanting to move on quickly. You nod along, not wanting to rock the boat, even as you're asked to waive rights you didn't fully understand. That desire to avoid conflict, so often praised in women, becomes the wedge that chips away at your bargaining power. Before you know it, you've accepted a figure or clause that looks reasonable in the room but leaves you scrambling later. Research confirms it. Women report higher satisfaction with mediated outcomes, yet decades down the line they're more likely than men to regret those very agreements. That initial relief, no courtroom drama, no extended legal battle, feels like a win, until life throws curveballs and you discover there's no backup plan. You've traded heated arguments for hidden losses, all in the name of keeping the peace. To guard against this trap, treat friendly as a warning sign, not a benefit. Frame questions clearly. Is this in my best financial interest? What would a court likely order? Pause whenever the mood turns too cozy and insist on a legal review before you sign. It may feel awkward to break the harmony, but that brief discomfort beats a lifetime of second guessing. And once you've locked in your agreement, there's no turning back. Now that you know the 7 hidden traps: missing assets, bargaining imbalances, overlooked pensions, support shortfalls, ignored abuse, no second chances, and the friendly facade, you're armed with the insight to protect your future. Take a moment to reflect. Have you spotted any of these pitfalls in your own mediation plans? If so, pause the process, seek expert review, and insist on the safeguards you deserve. Mediation can be a powerful tool when used wisely, but skipping that legal check is a gamble you can't afford. What's your biggest takeaway from these warnings? Drop a comment below and share one change you'll make before signing anything. If this video gave you clarity, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more practical advice, and tap the bell so you never miss an insider tip. Your support helps us keep uncovering the truths others leave off the table, and helps you stay one step ahead. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.